Hi everyone, welcome to Living the Road. Today I'm going to be showing you how I make my easy homemade sourdough bread recipe. It's not the typical sourdough bread. There's no stretch and folds. It's simply just mix the dough, pour it into a grease pan, let it rise, and then put it into the fridge overnight and then bake in the morning. Super simple. It's much easier than the typical sourdough. Here we have a bowl of water, 1 3/4 cup of warm water, spring water. Here we have my sourdough starter, which you can see is bubbly. I fed it last weekend, so it's been a week, and placed it in the fridge so it's hungry. Extra virgin olive oil, molasses, vital wheat gluten, some dark rye flour, white whole wheat, unbleached white flour, and some oats. I typically use a mix of different flours. Okay, let's begin. Here I'm going to pour the sourdough starter into my bowl of warm water with 1 3/4 cup of warm water. And I don't really measure. Sourdough is kind of an art form, so I put about that much. It's probably about a cup. And then mix it into the warm water. Just like so. Then I add a splash of olive oil. And again, I don't measure. A splash of molasses. Like so. And then mix. It doesn't need to be incorporated all that well at this point. Then I take my unbleached white bread flour. And add a cup. So I mix this in. I'll add a cup of whole wheat flour. At this point, I'll add about a teaspoon of sea salt. And again, I don't really measure. So, about maybe a teaspoon and a half. And mix that in. So every time I make this bread is different. I use different flours, just kind of whatever I have. But typically I add about 3.5 to 4 cups of flour. So you can see it's about a thick batter at this point. Add, with rye flour, you only want to add about 25%. So I might add half a cup or so. Again, I don't really measure. I'm going to add cup of oatmeal. And it's the first time I'm trying it, I'm going to add some cornmeal as well. And I'll add, again, about half a cup. Just a mix. Typically I make my sandwich dough rather wet. It's also kind of my lazy version of bread. I don't do typical stretch and folds to build the gluten. It's kind of mix, let rise, and stick in the fridge for overnight or so, or even up to a couple of days. And then that's really it. And then I bake. Oh, I forgot the vital wheat gluten. For this, I typically do a couple of tablespoons, probably a tablespoon per cup. Oops, a little too much. And that goes. Alright, and the dough is coming together. You can see how wet and sticky it is. I find this gives a more airy texture to my sandwich bread. Now I poured the dough into a greased loaf pan. I'll let it rise approximately maybe 7 or 8 hours or so. I want it to get up to about the top of the pan, and then I'll put it in the fridge. I just covered it with a disposable shower cap to keep the moisture in. Hi everyone, I'm back about 5 hours later. Here you can see the bread has risen pretty well. It's up to the top of the pan. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in the fridge overnight, and then I will bake it in the morning. So the thing about bulk fermentation with sourdough is that depending on the temperature, it can go faster or slower. So today was a pretty warm day here in cool California. It was about, in the mid 90s or so. So the bread rose pretty fast in about 5 hours. So sometimes during the winter, it can take 10 or even more hours to bulk ferment. So I will see you again in the morning to bake. Good morning, everyone. Here we are at 8 a.m. the next morning. The dough has been in the fridge since last night, about 9 p.m. You can see it's not overproofed. It's still mounted in the pan. It's almost up to the edge. It's kind of sank a little bit, but that's to be expected in the cold. So putting it in the fridge helps to develop the flavor. I could have baked it last night if I wanted to, but it would have been a good bread, but not as good as it could be after putting it in the fridge. So sometimes I will leave it in the fridge 12 hours up to several days to help to develop that flavor. And also if I just don't have time to bake, it's easy to just stick it in the fridge and let it do its thing. So the cold temperatures slows down the rise. So I put it in last night while the dough was still mounted. It wasn't overproofed or anything. Covered it and put it in the fridge so it can sit there as long as needed. I think the longest I've done is about 2 or 3 days. All right, let's get baking. So I'll be baking the bread at 375 degrees for 45 minutes. Okay, the bread is out of the oven. I'll let it cool for a bit, and then I'll show you the crumb. See you back in a minute. Okay, back again, everyone. Here you can see the crumb. It's a little dense as it's whole grain, fairly whole grain, with all the oats, the cornmeal, and the whole wheat flour. But it'll be delicious nonetheless for sandwiches. So this is how I make my sourdough loaves usually, especially for sandwiches. So now I want to tell you a little bit about how I got into sourdough in the first place. As you know, we like to travel. We've been to Alaska many times, 6 times on cruises, and I'm very into collecting cookbooks everywhere we go. And one of the first Alaskan cruises we did, I got a book on sourdough and the sourdough process and how to make sourdough bread. So that was our first Alaskan cruise about 2007. And since then, I've picked up sourdough for a number of years and then kind of dropped it. And then about last January of 2024, I picked it up again, created a starter, and I've been baking bread weekly ever since. So it's been about 9 months. So that's kind of how I got into sourdough. Sourdough has been, that was a traditional way of making bread for millennia. And only until modern times, with the invention of commercialized yeast, sourdough was how people made bread to feed their families. So I really like the historical nature of it and kind of getting back to my roots, so to speak. It's more nutritious for you. It has a lower glycemic index. The sourdough cultures themselves are also good for gut health. So sourdough overall is very beneficial. I mean, you don't want to eat too much of it, still a carb and still calorie dense, but this is probably a healthier way to go than store-bought traditional bread. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you learned something about sourdough bread. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.